Now, G4S has issued a statement today saying it will no longer be investing in correctional services in South Africa. The announcement comes just a day after the Department of Correctional Services itself issued a notice to terminate its contract with G4S at the Mangaung Correctional Center. This follows the escape of convicted murderer and rapist Thabo Bester from Mangaung Correctional Center in May 2022 after he faked his own death. The department gave the company 90 days to wrap up its running of the Mangaung Center. G4S says it will continue to cooperate with the Department of Correctional Services and will ensure that there's an orderly transition of services. The company also says that it will continue to invest in other sectors in South Africa. Let's now speak to investigative journalist Ruth Hopkins. She's been investigating G4S operations in prisons for a long time and has published her findings in books. Good afternoon, Ruth. Thank you very much for your time. Well, we saw the statement. I don't know if you've seen it, and I know you've been following this story very closely about G4S and in South Africa. They are confirming today that a position that they took in 2019, that when the contract at the Mangaung Correctional Center would expire, that was originally supposed to be in 2026, they will then no longer be investing in correctional services in South Africa. So basically they are reaffirming that after getting a notice from government.
Yes, indeed. And I think they already announced this in 2019 that they were going to discontinue their prison operation in Africa after 2026. So it's really, that's no news.
Yeah, it's something that they had already announced, and then today they're just confirming that. Why do you think they would do this?
I have no idea. I mean, I think given the fact that this particular G4S run prison has experienced such a lot of chaos and abuse and violence and has been taken over by the state twice, yet G4S puts out a statement saying they've got a brilliant track record. I mean, I think that they probably don't know really what to say, because there's only really been bad press about this particular prison, and not just bad press, but like actual evidence of horrific human rights violations, horrific corruption, abuse, and really the Thabo Bester escape is just the tip of the iceberg.
Yeah, you're quite right. I mean, in their statement, they claim to have a strong track record. They've been recognized as a well-run center, and they've got the highest possible rating for a correctional center, patting themselves on the back. Meanwhile, we know from you and other journalists who've been investigating there that this is far from the truth.
Yeah, and I read the statement, and it said that the Human Rights Commission and the Judicial Inspectorate of Correctional Services gave them a really good rating. And the Judicial Inspector of Correctional Services, I'm not so sure, because I think they're partly responsible for exposing the Bester escape, because I believe Edwin Cameron gave Ground Up News his report. But I'm very disappointed with the Human Rights Commission, because I actually approached them and said, you know, this is going on there, and if you want to have access to my evidence, you know, more than welcome. And they never followed up on that. And whereas I think I've documented widespread human rights violations extensively, and my work has never been challenged. The research is watertight, factual, evidence-based, and it could be acted on. You know, the Human Rights Commission could have held perpetrators of very serious human rights violations accountable, yet they didn't. And I just find that really quite disappointing. 45
million rand a month of a contract. Thabo Bester walks out of prison not once, not twice, several times, going out for long weekend trips and coming back to his cell, even hosting investment conferences from his prison cell. I mean, that's a shocker of a record by G4S. In your investigations, Ruth, I don't know where else G4S operates, because they call themselves G4S South Africa. And just because of that, I'm assuming they're present in other countries. And I don't know how they're doing there. Do you have any knowledge at all of how they're doing elsewhere?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. I set up the private security network, and this is a network of investigative journalists from all around the world investigating the private security sector. And the first project was around G4S. And so you can check out our website. If you Google private security network, you'll get there. And stories from India, Colombia, Kenya, Malawi, Nigeria. G4S runs prisons in South Africa, UK, and Australia, and used to run prisons in the United States, youth detention centres, from which they withdrew because they had a terrible track record. In the UK, they run 4 or 5 private prisons. One was also taken over by the state, and the contract terminated in 2018, Birmingham Prison. 2 other prisons also had their contract terminated because absolute chaos, abuse, human rights violations were exposed by journalists. Medway Prison and Brookhouse Detention Centre, an immigration detention centre. They ran an immigration detention centre in Australia called Manus Island. In 2014, riots broke out there. 1 person died, 77 people ended up being injured. They lost that contract. So they basically, in my view at least, have a terrible track record. But clearly, globally, all over the world, money speaks and they keep making a profit. I mean, in the UK, for example, 2 years ago, there was a new contract for a new private prison. And G4S in the UK has a terrible track record. But who gets this new contract for a 1,600-bed prison? G4S. So clearly, I think, it's capitalism on steroids and money speaks.
Yeah, I mean, they conclude their statement by saying they'll continue to cooperate with DCS and so on for an orderly transition of services, but they've been begging 45 million rand a year. And I interviewed Crispin Peary just the other day. He speaks on behalf of the Department of Justice and Correctional Services at the national level. He says during this 90-day period, they're going to be discussing how things are going to go forward. I asked him, are they going to be paying any fees? Some of these contracts have got those penalty clauses that if you end a contract ahead of time. But in my view, you can correct me if I'm wrong, in this particular case of Mangaung Correctional Center, and from the reports you've mentioned of shocking abuses there and human rights abuses and all sorts of allegations, they don't deserve a cent.
I would agree with that. I mean, I would say a company that excels in violating human rights, allowing torture to take place, forced injections with antipsychotic drugs, this crazy escape, all of that happened under the auspices of G4S. It's the second time that the government is taking over. I would say they don't deserve a cent. Yeah. But the problem is also that DCS is equally responsible. They've covered up for this company again and again and again. DCS is complicit. So I think that's also a real problem in accountability, like who is holding who accountable.
That's a very important point you're raising there, indeed. And I was just thinking, I mean, the governing party, being the ANC, I mean, has fought against abuse of human rights. And meanwhile, it employs a company that's accused of such, not just in South Africa, but as you've said, Ruth, elsewhere. Final question to you, which I find fascinating, and because you've been investigating G4S and other security companies worldwide for quite some time, I need to ask you this. I just find it odd that G4S won't speak to us, and they attribute this statement they issued. They said you can attribute the quotes to a G4S South Africa spokesperson, somebody faceless. They are running like they are a secret society of sorts.
Yeah, well, they are. I mean, I investigated this prison for 10 years, and everybody thinks G4S would come after me and try and stop me. All they did was, as much as possible, ignore me, keep calm and carry on, and just ignore everything I was saying. I had a lot more sort of harassment and intimidation by DCS, not by G4S. They just keep calm and carry on and keep making that profit. And I think they'll have a hard one ignoring this situation. At least I hope so. I hope they don't manage to kind of keep calm and carry on. By the way, G4S is now owned by Allied Universal, which is a big American private security multinational. So they're no longer owned by the British anymore. So I'm also very interested to see what Allied Universal has to say about this whole situation.
Yeah, and I'm just wondering who's getting paid besides G4S itself for people just to carry on as if nothing has been wrong in our prison, especially those who are in the private hands of G4S. Thank you very much for your time this afternoon. Ruth Hopkins, investigative journalist. She's written books. She's investigated the Mangaung Central Correctional Facility for like 10 years. And now we know that really things were really messy there. But G4S is on its way out now, thankfully. I think Ronald Lamola and the government of Matamela Ramaphosa should not pay them any more money despite the contract, because they got a 90-day notice period. Up to last month, they were being paid 45 million rand a month. And Thabo Bester walks out not once, not twice, several times, going on holiday, on long weekends, getaways with Nandipha Makuduma and coming back as if nothing happens. And then they help him to escape by burning a body of somebody else in the cell. And you expect to be paid 45 million rand again over the next 90 days of our taxpayers' money? Come on, Ronald Lamola, do the right thing.